We're about to jump into a wild story. It's one of epic conflict, high-stakes trade, and just incredible survival, all playing out across a vast ancient land to create a nation against all odds. First off, you've just got to appreciate the sheer scale of the stage we're talking about. This isn't just a big country. It's a landmass that covers 1/15 of the entire planet. It's immense, and believe me, its story is just as big. And for thousands and thousands of years, way before any European ships even dreamed of crossing the Atlantic, this was anything but an empty land. We're talking over 1 million indigenous people living in hundreds of distinct nations with their own advanced governments and vast trade networks. For the people who lived here, everything was defined by their relationship with the natural world. And don't mistake that for a simple life. No. This way of life supported complex democracies and trade routes that crisscrossed the continent for centuries. And then, in the early 1600s, everything changed. A collision of worlds began. Ambitious Europeans like Samuel de Champlain arrived. They were hungry for resources and had big dreams of building an empire in this new world. So, what was driving this whole risky enterprise? What was the big prize they were after? It wasn't gold, it wasn't spices, it was the beaver pelt. Yeah, this thick, fleecy fur became the absolute height of fashion in Europe. It was like gold. I mean, just stop and think about that for a second. This one unassuming little animal, it became the economic engine that would literally change the destiny of an entire continent. The dream of Canada was born on its back. Now, this fur trade wasn't just about making money. It was a total game changer. It created these incredibly powerful alliances between European and indigenous nations, but at the same time, oh boy, did it spark some intense, bitter rivalries that would define the future. And you can just watch the tension ramp up over the next century and a half. First, the French partner up with the Wendat to control the main river. Then, bam! Britain jumps into the game, setting up the legendary Hudson's Bay Company. And before you know it, another major player, the Northwest Company, shows up, and it turns into an all-out scramble for furs across the continent. And you have to understand the French and the British were playing two completely different games here. New France was all about building relationships, partnerships, and strategic trading posts. The British colonies to the south, their strategy was simple: take land and fill it with people fast. So, New France had a problem, a big one. The British were expanding like crazy, and New France was mostly just traders. To hold on to their claim, they needed more than forts. They needed families. They needed people to put down roots and build a real society. And the solution they came up with? It was one of the most audacious social experiments in history. The King of France sponsored a program to send nearly 800 poor, orphaned young women, who became known as the King's Daughters, on a one-way trip to the colony. So here was the deal, and it was a tough one. First, you had to survive the absolutely brutal journey across the Atlantic. If you made it, you got to choose a husband from the settlers. The king provided a dowry to get you started. And then, here's the kicker: if you had at least 10 kids, you'd get a pension for life. Their mission was literally to populate a nation. And the craziest part? It worked. I mean, it really worked. The population of New France doubled. Birth rates went through the roof, to levels Canada has never seen since. Today, something like 2/3 of all French Canadians can trace their family tree right back to one of these incredibly brave women. All right, let's fast forward a bit. By the early 1800s, this collection of northern colonies, a mix of French, British, indigenous peoples, was about to face the biggest test of its life: a full-scale invasion from its massive neighbor to the south, the United States. And this is the million-dollar question, right? How on earth could this tiny, scattered group of settlements possibly stand up to a rising superpower? On paper, survival looked next to impossible. I mean, just look at the numbers. It's not even a fair fight. You've got 8 million Americans versus maybe 500,000 people in all the Canadian colonies combined. The odds are just staggering. So if they weren't going to win with sheer numbers, how were they going to do it? Well, they had a secret weapon, an absolutely incredible and totally unlikely team of heroes. You had Tecumseh, the brilliant Shawnee strategist, General Brock, a British commander who loved to take risks, and people like Laura Secord, an ordinary farmer's wife who did something extraordinary. Okay, you want to see how this worked in practice? Take Fort Detroit. This wasn't one with guns, it was one with a mind game. Tecumseh and Brock pulled off one of the greatest bluffs in military history. They made their small force look huge, parading them around to terrify the American general, who ended up surrendering his entire army without a real fight. But the Americans made a huge miscalculation. They thought that by being brutal, by looting and burning towns like the capital, York, they'd scare everyone into giving up. But it did the exact opposite. It just made people angry and more determined than ever to fight back.
And the whole war is filled with these incredible moments. You've got Laura Secord walking 30 kilometers through hostile territory to deliver a warning. That warning leads directly to a battle where a whole American force is captured. Then, at Chateau Guigny, a tiny group of defenders tricks an army almost 3 times its size into retreating. These aren't just battles, they're the legends that a country is built on.
So let's just break down that victory at Chateauguay because it shows you exactly how they pulled this off. You had French-Canadian militia holding the line, indigenous warriors using the forest for ambushes, and even black soldiers blowing bugles from all over to make the Americans think they were surrounded by a huge army. Everyone played a part. And through all this fighting, something really important started to happen. All these different people, French, English, indigenous, you name it, who maybe didn't have a lot in common before, were suddenly fighting side by side for their homes. They were becoming something new, together. In the end, the Americans didn't win, and by holding them off, the people in these northern colonies basically drew a line in the sand. They made it clear, we are not going to be American. And right there, you see the very beginning of a distinct Canadian identity, an identity defined, first and foremost, by what it wasn't. So it leaves you with this really fascinating question, doesn't it? What does it mean to build a nation on a foundation like that? Not on some simple, unified idea, but on a messy history of rivalry, of crazy, unlikely alliances, and just sheer improbable survival. It's a complex beginning, and you know what? Those same forces are still shaping the country to this very day.